each city is unique and different cities do it differently. And there are a lot of things in the checklist that one has to take into account, but I'm kind of going through some of the bigger ones and that tend to trip people up. And LA has a checklist that you can use to kind of run down and say, okay, is my lot single family? Is it multifamily? If I follow the pathway for the state, how many units can I get? What are my height limits? What are my setbacks? All that kind of stuff. I mean, you really kind of have to know a few things to navigate it because it can get difficult. There's all kinds of interpretations. I mean, Los Angeles has like 6 ways to measure height, depending on what kind of project you're doing off of a hillside property. But then when you're checking for other pieces of these, what you can and can't do on the checklist, you'll see a long list of things that you need to confirm or deny. And there'll be things like rent control. Is there an existing unit? Is it rent controlled? And you have to clear all of these hurdles to confirm that you can actually do the project or not. And a couple of the big ones are fire. Right now I'm looking at the fire hazard severity zone map. The property that I randomly picked, you can see it is in a high fire hazard severity area or zone. And so you would be ruled out of certain things with SB 1123 being one of them. So that random property, definitely don't go call the owner because you can't do an SB project here. Now, if you do know some of the other opportunities, you can actually do a SB 9 project in this area. So SB 9 will allow you to subdivide up to 2 lots and do up to 4 units. In some cases, you might get more units out of that, depending on how the lot calcs out, whatever it might be. The other thing to note is that not every city does allow SB 9 in high fire hazard severity zones. For example, the Palisades now has been carved out specifically to not allow them because it was made into a big political public thing. And so you can't do it in the Palisades anymore. The other one is flood zone. I mean, this is just a random site selected, and I think we're in Marina Del Rey here. But you have to check to see if you're in 100-year floodplain, basically. And if you are, that eliminates the possibility of SB 1123 or 684. The other thing is the housing element. So if your site has been tagged, and down here, housing element sites, it has in ZIMAS a thing you can look up directly. There's a map that you can check for. So any of those requirements can be looked at or required by any city.
All right, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today we got a returning guest here because we got such great feedback from how tactical our last conversation was, from how practical it was, and how useful it was. Because I don't know about you guys, when I first look at a piece of dirt, I was like, what is this? This is just a piece of dirt. What can you do with it? And today we're going to go into the minds of one of the best architects in California, talking about how does he look at a piece of dirt? How does he look at a piece of dirt and say, this is what I can do on it with it, or this is what new legislation is out there. This is how I can apply towards this piece of dirt and maximize the highest and best use while optimizing for the lifestyle and the community around it. That's what's so cool about today's conversation. I'm so pumped for this. I know some of you guys have reached out to me with questions to follow up with Matt. First of all, Matt, welcome back to the podcast, man. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Ken. I'm doing great. I mean, it's Sunday morning, but I'm good.
Man, see, this is how I know we love what we do, because we get up on a Sunday morning, we try to do this recording, and we just know that during the week there's so much chaos, but we get to settle down a little bit on a weekend so that we can provide massive amounts of value for everybody out there that's trying to create more supply of affordable housing. So, man, I can't thank you enough, Matt, for coming back on.
Well, thank you for having me back.
Man, so Matt, I know we had so many ideas coming into this. We thought maybe we'd do a case study, maybe we'll get an old deal, maybe we'll do a new deal. How do you think is the best way to teach someone? And I love using the analogy, right? Like if our daughters were watching this and they want to learn about it one day, and God forbid, we're not around for that day. I want to make sure we're able to teach exactly what's in our brain so that our daughters can take it and run with it, honestly. So if you had to learn, like, how would you put that piece of dirt up and sort of walk your daughter through how do you actually figure out what do you put on this piece of dirt?
Yeah, I mean, that was what we were talking about kind of before this offline, was this first project we did that hopefully will be hers one day. And we found an empty piece of dirt, and it was somewhat compromised, right? I mean, it's like looking for those opportunities that other people can't see, I think is kind of essential from the
Yes.
very beginning, right? Even some of my clients right now that are doing SB 684, 1123, or now SB 79 just got passed on Friday. I don't know if you heard about that, but that's a big one for transit
Oh,
development. Yeah, Newsom signed the bill on Friday, I think. So a lot of people are talking about that. And in the future, maybe it won't be that. It'll be something else. So it's like keeping an ear to the ground and knowing what's out there and what opportunities are out there before sort of everyone else figures it out. Because, the property owners are going to figure out they're sitting on a 10-unit yield as opposed to a 1-unit yield. And then they're going to land prices will start to accelerate. So, but compromised properties like the one that we found, which was kind of a triangular shaped property, that was the opportunity there. Nobody wanted it. The price was low. And we knew we could design something for it. It was next to a freeway, stuff like that.
let me pause you there, Matt, because I think you used the word compromise, and not a lot of people in that's not in the know what does that mean. Like to you, what does compromise mean?
I mean, I don't even know what I just said. The site was compromised because it was cut in half. It was a triangular, like the freeway came through. And so it was a rectangular piece of property at one time. And then the freeway came through and basically sliced it at a diagonal for the easement for the roadway. And so what was left, and when I say compromised, I guess it was the triangular shaped property. So it was compromised from a rectangular shape to a wedge kind of shape, but it was also compromised by the proximity of the freeway itself. This is not always something that people want near them, but we knew that we could
Mhm.
buffer it. There were a lot of trees, and we could use, we kind of built a sound wall for it. And then we used the triangular shape to our advantage. It gave us some height benefits because once the lot was narrower, you could bump up the height, things like that.
Ah,
So it actually provided what a lot of people saw as a disadvantage actually provided advantages to us in that particular case. So I think
oh,
that,
so good.
that this is how, you figure out how to work with those constraints. And I think that that's really key, is to have a mind that's attuned to not seeing these as barriers or limitations, but seeing them as opportunities.
Yeah, and I love using this analogy of leverage, right? You're figuring out, okay, cool. Someone views it as a disadvantage because it's next to the freeway. You're like, I can solve that problem with trees or a sound wall to kind of buffer out the noise. Some people will say, boom, I see a triangular lot. I can't do anything. You saw it as, well, if I follow this regulation, then I get additional height density.
Yeah.
That is how you think about real estate from like an entrepreneurial mindset, not just accepting as is, but figuring out what else can you do with this. And this is why you wanted the podcast for this case study, man, because like this is fire, dude. This is what's up, man. Oh, okay. So Matt,
So
let's talk about how do you walk. Let's. Do you have a hypothetical site you want to bring up today so that we can
yeah.
maybe kind of follow along your thought process? What are your thoughts?
So let's see how this goes. Okay. So the first thing I was going to share was, let's see here, this
Yeah.
one. Okay. So assume that we just found a random piece of property. I just
Mhm.
grabbed a completely arbitrary site here in Los Angeles. This is ZIMAS. I don't know if you're familiar with this tool or interface, but LA, for all the grief we give it, does have a pretty amazing tool called ZIMAS. And
Mm.
you can get all of the data for the project or for the property in one kind of long view right here on the left. And so in LA, that's a very useful thing to have. In other places, you don't kind of have this clearinghouse of information necessarily. So you might have to go and seek out certain aspects on individual sites. So the first thing is, if you find a site like this and you go into ZIMAS, usually what we do is we go to the assessor map. In ZIMAS, you can find it, right here, and you can click on the actual map itself, and you can download the map, and it will give you the dimensions of the site. So almost always we start with an assessor map to get dimensions and then calculate the area for the site. And then depending on what we're doing, this clearly has an existing home on it. and maybe a garage or a secondary unit. But depending on what we're doing, we're checking for eligibility for a variety of things. So we're looking at SB 684, SB 1123. If you're in LA, they actually have an automated, I think under this planning and zoning section here, you go down and they have all these A, B, and SB eligibilities. And you can click on them and it will take you to their checklist, which is this
Oh,
as an
wow.
example. So this has an SB 684 eligibility criteria checklist, and it goes down and then it tells you what, some of it may not be analyzed yet, and you'll have to kind of do those pieces yourself, but it will give you a head start. If you don't have access to this, then what you need to do is go to what I use is the ABAG checklist. And so this is the same checklist, just a more generic version of it. So if you find a site anywhere in California, you can go through this checklist and use it to see if your lot qualifies for SB 11, what we'll now call 1123 because it's kind of overridden 684. The law is just the law. It's been modified by those two bills. But, this will give you the checklist. So, 10 or fewer parcels, meets all of this set of requirements, zone for multifamily, which is specifically towards SB 684, or vacant for single family. So that's a generic checklist you can use to see if the project qualifies.
So you have this checklist. I'm sure that's the same checklist you and your firm uses, right? Whenever analyzing a lot. Just for
You
people that
can
are
just,
tuning in for the first
yeah.
time, Matt, that have not heard about SB 1123, can you just remind people what SB 1123 is and why you're trying to use that framework towards this single family lot?
Sure. So SB 1123, 684 was passed last year and went into effect last July. 1123 was passed this year and went into effect in this July. And the law was changed to allow the subdivision of multiple parcels. And when it was 684, it was only in multifamily zoning. And now that 1123 is kicked in, it is also for single family zoning. But you need to meet certain criteria. So it's got to be less than 10 units, as I just said. In the case of a single family zoning, you need a vacant lot or a lot that has a unit that is uninhabitable, which is a little bit dicey because we don't know exactly what that criteria means, uninhabitable, and it's open to interpretation. So that's being worked through currently. You kind of have to go through and let the city give you that determination. You have to max out the density of 30 DUA, or now it was max out 100% of 30 DUA or the underlying zoning, whichever was higher. Now it's 66% of 30 DUA or 100% at maximum. If the site is single family zoned, there is no underlying density. So you're only working with the 30 DUA, which is called Mullen density. And you have to max out at what is 66% of Mullen density, so 20 DUA. And the problem has been that many sites were being pushed out of the legislation because you'd have at 20 DUA more than 10 units on your lot. So what we've started doing is looking at remainder lots, where if you carve off a piece of the lot and some area that still has access, then you can use the remainder of the lot to calculate your density and not exceed the 20 DUA.
That's exactly right. And I love how you kind of went through that because now you don't want the lot to be disqualified. That's the reason why you will use the remainder lot strategy so that you don't get the lot disqualified from the max of 10
Correct.
units. Got
Correct.
it. So this is great. Thank you for kind of going through that. And I think with this example that you put, obviously, guys, don't call up this landowner, which is just an arbitrary site.
I
But
just
what
picked
we're
it. I
doing,
threw a dart. We could pick this one.
but what you're doing here is the equivalent of if you're in any other city, let's say within California, you have to figure out whether or not that lot is eligible for the lot splits or for SB 684, all these other sort of checklists that you have to go through to determine what is the maximum or highest and best use for that piece of lot. And obviously, if you have no idea what you're doing, you got to reach out to someone like Matt and his team, obviously. So, all right, keep going, Matt. I just want to make sure that
Okay.
people understand, like, hey, just because LA has this does not mean every single city has it.
Right. So that's the thing that I'll walk through a little bit too. So, the checklist you can download, you just Google the ABAG SB 1123 checklist. This is Association of Bay Area Governments. So but it's not specific to the Bay Area. They've just created this checklist for governments to create their own checklist based on this. So a lot of them are based on this, and you can kind of go straight to the source. But then when you're checking for other pieces of these, what you can and can't do on the checklist, you'll see a long list of things that you need to confirm or deny. And there'll be things like rent control. Is there an existing unit? Is it rent controlled? And you have to clear all of these hurdles to confirm that you can actually do the project or not. And a couple of the big ones are fire. So right now I'm looking at the fire hazard severity zone map. The property that I randomly picked is this one. And you can see it is in a high fire hazard severity area or zone. And so you would be ruled out of certain things, with SB 1123 being one of them. So that random property, definitely don't go call the owner, because you can't do an SB project here. And I just wanted to show that this is what you need to look at. Now, if you do know some of the other opportunities, you can actually do a SB 9 project in this area. So SB 9 will allow you to subdivide up to 2 lots and do up to 4 units. In some cases, you might get more units depending on how the lot calcs out, whatever it might be. The other thing to note is that not every city does allow SB 9 in high fire hazard severity zones. So, for example, the Palisades now has been carved out specifically to not allow them, because it was made into a big political public thing. And so you can't do it in the Palisades anymore. You can do it in other neighborhoods, including Altadena. But some cities, like Oakland, will not allow it. They don't allow SB 9 in any high fire area. But 1123 is specifically ruled out as being allowed in these zones by the law itself.
So you're almost going through like your own personal mental checklist where, okay, this city allows SB9 fire zones, but because this is a fire zone, SB 1123 would not apply. So you're still thinking like, okay, boom, fire zone. So that rules that one out. What about the city? Do they allow SB9? So I can do a lot split, maybe up to 4 units. So that's how you're going through that process in your brain. Did I miss
Yeah.
anything? How you thought about it?
No, that's correct. That's correct. Or ADUs would be another alternate path. You can add up to a certain number of ADUs within a structure. Outside of a structure, there are multiple pathways through ADUs. So we are doing a project in this neighborhood. It's not on that lot. And we're doing 3 ADUs and a 4th one in an existing multi-unit structure. So that was the route that owner chose to take, because there weren't a lot of other options available to them.
So you said 3 ADUs, right? And some folks out there listening might think, well, how do you get 3 ADUs? Isn't an ADU just like a garage conversion? How do you get 3 ADUs onto a lot?
So this is where it gets a bit more complicated, and I don't, we probably don't have the time to jump into it, but there is a checklist in Los Angeles, and there are multiple pathways as to how you can get to each number of ADUs. And depending on which pathway you choose, if you have an existing multifamily development, I believe the density is much higher. Well, I know the density is much higher. It might even be only limited by what the site can contain. And so that made the most sense for us on this project. But there are multiple pathways, and LA has a checklist that you can use to kind of run down and say, okay, is my lot single family? Is it multifamily? If I follow the pathway for the state, how many units can I get? What are my height limits? What are my setbacks? All that kind of stuff there's a flow chart, for lack of a better term.
Wow. So much complexity in how you go through
Yeah,
it. All right.
there is. I mean,
Okay.
you really kinda have to know a few things to navigate it because it can get difficult. And some of it, especially when you're in hillside, it's a hillside area, there's all kinds of interpretations. I mean, Los Angeles has, like, 6 ways to measure height depending on what kind of project you're doing off of a hillside property. So, these are all things that knowledge you gain from experience. Some developers have been doing it long enough, they understand it and they can do it on their own, and others, we're here to help.
Got it. That's super interesting. So we talked about SB9, how that applies in certain. Selfishly, I live in Orange County, right, Matt? Do you know which cities in Orange County allow for sort of SB9 even when they're in sort of brush fire zones?
I mean, no, I don't know individually. It's because there's
Hmm.
so many cities, right? You'd have to check with each individual city, but every city has to allow all of this in some form of another. It's all state law, right? ADU law, SB9 lot splits,
Hmm.
SB 1123 and 684 lot splits, like all that state law, and they have to abide by it. But yeah, it's sort of like we're watching what they'll do or what ways they'll find to say no, right? I mean, it seems often that it's find a way to no, and different cities do that differently, and you kind of have to go in and
Be a
talk with
thought
them.
partner. Yeah,
Yeah, I
understand.
mean, yeah, and I think that understanding what their temperament is and what their needs are and what their desires are. I mean, you have to listen and then work with, the design constraints that you're given. It's just like I was talking about earlier. But everybody does it a bit different. And so each city is unique.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So I know we talked about zoning. We talked about looking at SB eligibility. If you're on LA County, looked at the fire maps. What's next in this step?
So again, there are a lot of things in the checklist that one has to take into account, but I'm kind of going through some of the bigger ones and that tend to trip people up. The other one is flood zone. So, I mean, this is again just a random site selected, and I think we're in Marina Del Rey here. But you have to check to see if you're in what is here a 100-year floodplain, basically. And if you are, that eliminates the possibility of SB 1123 or 684. The other thing is the housing element. So if your site has been tagged, and down here, housing element sites, it has in ZIMAS a thing you can look up directly. There's a map that Oakland has that you can check for, but in many cities, unlike Los Angeles where it has it readily available, you need to search up their housing element plan. So this is another thing.
People want that tactical value because I can't tell you how many times I just listen to certain podcasts. They're like, oh, put an ADU on it, but there's no substance behind it. And this is why we're doing this.
Yes, but I don't have the map open that will give you the Oakland housing element label. But the point of it is that you need to make sure you look it up because
And when you're looking at the housing element, what are you looking for? For how much units are allowed there? What are you looking
so if
for?
they've earmarked a site for housing, the housing element, then you'll end up with affordable requirements. So if they've earmarked site for housing element in their housing element plan, then it is required to be developed with affordable units. So deed restricted affordable. And
Got it.
so what you kind of don't want to end up with is being tied to affordable units if you don't have them in your pro forma. I mean, some people will look at doing affordable units to get density bonus allowances, which is a whole other aspect to this. I've had a few people look at it, density bonus that they would layer on to SB 1123 or 684. And I haven't tested this yet, but one of the issues that comes up, and we can kind of look at this in a second, is that height is a problem. So there are certain things that the
Mm.
city can still require as part of their purview. And so one of those is front yard setbacks, one of those is building height, access, and open space. Those are some of the things they can still impose. And then other objective standards, as long as they don't conflict with the density. So what Oakland is doing now is developing series of objective standards that control things like the pitch of your roof, which I find a little bit excessive, but it's an objective standard. So if 50% of the buildings on a street have a roof of a certain slope, then you have to have a roof of a certain slope as well, for example. So any of those requirements can still be looked at or required by any city.
Wow. And any of those factors can be sort of a no to your project where,
Right. So you may have to
yeah,
look elsewhere, like I said, to density bonus, and then you provide an affordable unit in order to get waivers and concessions for things like height, parking, open space. But it'll be interesting to see which cities are starting to require, because, and this gets a little bit more into the weeds, but the Sheets ruling that said you can't charge impact fees for affordable housing says that you can't do that. So now they're looking at potentially, I've heard many cities are thinking they're going to have an inclusionary requirement that you can't opt out of or pay an in lieu fee. I think that that's problematic because it may kill deals and then
oh
housing
yeah,
won't get built. But it may be a requirement that you can then take, if you do provide those affordable units, you can then take advantage of the density bonus allowances and build more or build taller or build less open space or whatever other concessions and things they allow.
and when you talked about affordable requirements, right? Just so everyone can be level set, it's obviously when we say affordable, it means that you are setting aside certain number of units that's deed restricted for people making a certain percentage of the area median income. Now, are you referring to for sale properties or rental properties or both for the affordability requirements?
I am referring to both. So
Got it.
any density that you build will have potential requirements around it. I mean, obviously, if it's a single family house, it's not going to have those same requirements. But it's interesting in places like Oakland, they have had single family requirements that if you even build one single family house, you still have to pay the affordable housing impact fees. And in fact, that triangular shaped property deal that I was telling you about, we did have to pay impact fees for those 3 units. I think they were like $15,000 a unit.
Whoa.
And
Whoa.
then that's intended to go into a fund. And then when someone builds affordable housing, they can apply for money from that fund to build that housing. But it comes with
Got it.
certain strings. Certain strings get attached to it.
Oh, all right. So I just want to make sure people understood that the reason why some deals don't work anymore when you have an affordable requirement is because, well, you're doing a for sale property. Let's use very round numbers. Let's say you're selling every single unit at $1 million at the market price, but there's one unit that's affordable that you can probably only sell for, let's call it 600 grand or 400 grand. Then all of a sudden you lost 400 to 600 grand of margin in that deal, and now that deal is no longer buildable, right? Just using very, very rough numbers estimates. So I just want
Yeah,
people to
and
understand like why it doesn't work.
I mean, it's more common in rental properties where the deed restriction goes to any
Yeah,
renter that takes that unit, and you would have to continue to restrict that unit at that affordable level. And as the affordability level changes, it might increase, but you're still tied to that affordability level. In the for sale project, I don't actually know how it works specifically if you sell the project at an affordable number,
I've only
but
seen
I
only work with heavy, heavy subsidies, Matt, where you're essentially the builders are essentially selling those units at a loss. Oh,
and you're trying to make up for it in the profit of the other units. But I do
yeah,
believe that if the person that buys that unit then turns around and tries to sell it themselves, they can't turn a profit on that. They have to sell it at that
correct.
same affordable level.
Exactly. All right. I love how we kind of went through that. So, oh, you got a little screen set up there.
So this is a property that I'm going to use to kind of give an example. So in this case, what happened is that, if you add these two, this is kind of jumping ahead to how we got to where we're going with the remainder lot. But if you add these two areas up, and I don't know how mathy you want to get here, but 18,830 plus 6,725
Yep.
is 25,555. Okay, divided by 1452 is 17.59. So in the original days of 684, I mean, you wouldn't even been able to do this lot because it's R1, so R1 didn't qualify. But let's say it was multi-zoned. This is one of those examples where at 25,000 plus square feet, it puts me at a density of 17.59. Well, you can only do 10 units on the lot. So now my density calc has basically forced me out of the law. I can't do it anymore. This would be also used in multifamily for whatever underlying zoning was there. So sometimes it might be higher. It might have pushed you to 20 or 25 units, the underlying zoning, and you still can't do it, right? So then what they did was they said, okay, the new law is going to allow you to do 66% of that and see if that gets you there. So in this case, times 0.66 equals 11.6 units. So I'm still over the 10 unit maximum. So I couldn't use this lot at all in this case. However, with the remainder lot, as I'm showing on the screen here, you can carve off a certain amount of area. And this is kind of being debated as to what the requirements are. So there's a bunch of stuff around this, like you can't use the remainder lot for access to your own site, for instance. You can't drive across it. In this case, what the land use attorney had told us was that the remainder lot actually needs to conform to standard lot requirements. So you can't carve off the remainder lot and have it be like a sliver of 10-foot wide property to chop off your area to get it to work. You have to have it meet the minimum lot size, width, frontage, all those requirements. I think this is still being debated. You know, somebody might carve off a sliver and say, we're going to dedicate it to as a park or something. And I think some people are looking at that. In this particular case, we met the minimum frontage and we met the minimum width and we met the minimum area for this remainder lot. So that then got us down to this 18,000, which got us to 12.96 units, which then got us to 8.55 units at 66%.
Got it. And that's how you are able to get it to qualify to build 8 units on this lot.
Correct. So if you look at it here, this was our initial, this larger perimeter was our initial lot, where I've shown the fence here is the primary lot, with this being the remainder out here. And then you can see we went to 8 units. And I think, what was our minimum that I was just showing? 8.55 minimum. So we could have gone up from here, but not more than 10. Even though the maximum calcs out to 12.96 or 13, you can't do more than 10. So we could have done 10. We looked at different scenarios and, you know, I showed them what it would look like. And I think this is something we talked about last time too. What starts to happen is it starts to look really dense, and you're in a single family neighborhood, and, you know, you've got a bunch of single family houses on 6,000 square foot lots, and suddenly you've got houses on 2,000 square foot lots. They're starting to look really tight. And I think it becomes a market issue.
Got it. And that makes a lot of sense. So this is why you got 8 units, because you're getting up to 66%. And in your note there, you said, hey, maybe we're going to do 9 units if that's the requirement, because they might be rounding up. But rounding down a scenario also makes it look way more symmetrical too for the neighborhood.
Yeah. And so, you know, then you're looking at, and you can see here roughly what it looks like in terms of density. And you can kind of see there could be one house on this lot here somewhere. So this is the density you're looking at that surrounds this neighborhood.
Got it. And you could put a one home on that remainder lot, or 2 homes or 3 homes?
No, you have to follow. So now this remainder lot follows the requirements of a standard lot. So you can't
Got it.
re-subdivide under SB 684 on the remainder lot, is my understanding.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So all in all, you could get up to 9 units on what was previously that one lot.
Right.
Got it.
Or, I mean, you could have done 10 in one, so 11. So then, I mean, before I jump ahead here, if I hide this again. So here's the lot. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth. I think usually before I even get to this point, what I'll do is I'll take something that I know works. So let's call it a 20-foot by 40-foot box. And that's 800 square feet roughly. So times 2 is 1,600. You're in the neighborhood of the 1,750 max. So this is kind of generally my building block. I also know that it will work from a footprint standpoint because I've done so many of these. Let's see what's here. Yeah. So this is one. This is another one. So you can see this is 23 by 44. Okay. These are, I think, exactly 20 by 40. I don't have dimensions on them. And these are just my sketches from the initial look.
Love it.
This is a different project. This project is the one we're kind of looking at. We didn't actually end up with this floor plan. We ended up running a straight stair along one edge and kind of did something a little different, improved it. But the point is, in roughly 20 by 40, you can fit, a 2-car, 3-bed, 3.5 bath or 2.5 bath unit. They can reorient. So this is access along this long edge. This door could be flipped to that long edge too. And there's the garage. Whereas here, the garage and the door are along the short edge. So we know this pretty much will work in a variety of scenarios. Eventually, what we did in this case is we got from the 2-car garage inside the house was pinching the living space quite a bit. So we ended up from there we removed the garage and parked along the edge of the unit and made it into 2 tandem spaces and then put another bedroom in the unit. Yeah. So if you look at this layout here, this is showing the space between the units as parking. So you can see the tandem parking here and the unit sits next to it. Ultimately, we ended up going back and redesigning this so that the parking was back inside the unit like it shows in this plan. But by rearranging the stair, it actually made this a little more open. So we slipped the kitchen over into where the stair is now, ran a stair along this edge. I can show you that floor plan actually. Yeah, here. So you can see where we ended up. This is showing a 1-car garage, but really it's 2. And they can only require 1 is under the current law. But, our expectation is that people will be able to park 2 cars here. But you can see how
truck or something like that. But
you can see how yeah, exactly. You can see how the living space kind of lays out much better here.
Oh yeah, much more open.
But I mean, we went through iteration after iteration to kind of get a half bath in, make the garage big enough to hold everything you need. There was a lot of kind of running around, but again, the point more is that the 20 by 40 we know will get you there. So that's our building block.
Got it. Just for you understanding, 20 by 40 is a relatively desirable space that the market will absorb, right?
Yeah. And also that it will not exceed the minimum density or maximum square footage.
Got it. Well, let me ask one more question because I want to make sure I'm sequentially following you. Because first of all, you went through, the eligibility and the zoning, and then you looked at fires, and then you went through your AB checklist, and then you start playing with the parcel. I knew in last conversation we talked a lot about how sometimes the developers they miss the utilities and how much cost that can be. When did you start looking at utilities before you start playing with lot, or do you play with the lot size first and then look at the utilities afterwards?
I mean, I think that you need to make sure that there is utility access. And so, when you're going through that checklist that I went through very quickly, you're looking at fire, you're looking at flood, all those things. I mean, utility access is not a requirement. I think that the urban condition that there be a certain density is a requirement. And generally, that if you're in that density, you probably have access. But it is advisable to go and make sure that you'll have service. But I think you have to also, I think we talked about this last time, you have to just assume worst case scenario in your pro forma. Yes, I'm going to need a new sewer lateral. I'm going to need joint trench. I'm going to need to service all these units, and I'm probably going to have to increase meter sizes and, get more water to the site, all those things. So, I don't know that you will have those answers until later in the process. I think you have to kind of try to assume worst case scenario. And when you're doing your pro forma, understanding what each water hookup is and what each power hookup costs and all that kind of stuff, because you're building 8 new properties here. It's a very different thing than building even 8 units on one site that were not subdivided, or 1 unit on a site obviously would be a simpler thing.
Yeah, and I think that's super helpful because, I mean, I know you're working on a project in Santa Ana. We don't have to talk about the address, but I'm sure there's are places that you can look up to figure out what are those fees per meter hookup, et cetera, right? Like it's just an example. Where did you look that up? Is it just with the public utility service?
Yeah, you would have to go talk to them directly.
Got it.
So you can when you're messing with this a bit, and you can start to see, as you're site planning, how dense it gets if you want to have the 10 units on there. We have to follow this 20-foot setback at the front here. So now you're kind of being jammed into even less space. You can do this with the walls touching,
So there'd be
but
like townhomes then, essentially. That's the
yeah,
goal,
but if you do this, you may take a hit on your
right? Because once they're attached, they're not worth as much as detached.
right. So we'll just mess around with this and see how many units we can get while thinking about drive aisle access. We looked at, do we want to have access from over here? Do we want to reorient things? We're just moving blocks around and trying to figure out what the best layout might be in terms of having functionality, but also having livability. So certain things you have to have, and other things are nice to have, let's just say. So like 2 parking spaces, a garage, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
because
this,
and sometimes people don't have no parking spots at all. So if you can offer at least one, that makes you a little bit more competitive already in the market.
yeah, and in some cases we've looked at, okay, what happens if we go to 3 stories? If depending on what's allowed in that jurisdiction.
Uh,
So, it'll free up more open space on the ground level. We might be able to start to get more space between the buildings because of it, bigger yards. But this is where some of the debate and discussion comes in. The city doesn't allow a 3rd story or this much height. And you say, well, I can't get my 10 units on the site without it. They're not supposed to physically preclude a density of 30 DUA. So if you say, you can't physically preclude my density, then I have to start to cut into those things that you're allowed to limit me on. So the front yard setback, the height, the open space, the access, you have to give on those. But cities don't want to. They'll say, this is also very subjective. They'll say, no, you can design around it. And we've run into that where they've just said, so you kind of want to do your best to just, follow the rules.
right, because I mean, it's already uphill climb getting a project approved, and you don't really want that hill to be steeper than it is.
Right, because you're walking into these places now, and they just look at you like deer in the headlights. They're like, "What? What?" You say, "We're doing an SB 684 project, and we're putting 8 units on this lot where you used to allow 1," and they just look, panic because they don't even know about it in most cases. The planners themselves.
Right, because I mean, it was so much legislation being passed, it's almost impossible to keep up with every single update and then learn how to apply that towards their own existing planning and zoning overlays, if you will. So, well, let me ask you this, right? So now that you've gotten all these sort of, you've kind of assessed the highest, the best use of that lot. Now it's just kind of just going back and forth with the owner or the developer to see whether or not it pencils, right? Is that generally how the sequence of events work and how you work with developers?
Yeah, I think that it's not hard science, right? Because you're saying, well, how much can we build a foot? You're going out and talk to contractors, and
Yes.
they're giving you some number which may or may not be real. They want the job. You don't know if the number is real until you get actual bids, and nobody's bidding this at this point. There's not enough information. The structural hasn't even been done, none of that. So there's no framing, plumbing, all that stuff. They can't really give you a hard number. So they'll shoot from the hip and they'll give you a number. And then you have the exit and you say, okay, well, houses in this neighborhood are selling X amount of dollars, but where's the data on the 10 unit on a single family lot sales comps? They don't exist. So you say, okay, my units are closer together and my lots are smaller than the average 1750 square foot house. So what am I going to take a hit on? How much of a hit am I going to take for that? They're new versus older housing. You're guessing in some ways. You're using logic and you're extrapolating, but there's no hard science. It's going to cost exactly this much and it's going to sell for exactly this much. They're not widgets. They're not iPhones or whatever.
Yeah, and it's almost like you are trying to go out there. You're trying to get as much information as possible. There's no way you're going to get 100% of all the information you're going to need. It might be a balance of you doing the comps yourself. It might be a balance of you talking with brokerages out there that maybe they're seeing or they have experience selling these types of very dense type of units that were kind of split up from a single family lot beforehand. But you try to get as much information as possible, but it's not possible to get everything. So
No,
it's a calculated
yeah.
risk.
Yeah, it's a calculated risk. I mean, that is it. I mean, I've had so many people say, just build it and it'll work. Don't worry. But I've also seen a fair number of developers go bankrupt. So, both things can be true. Um,
That is so right. I mean, so today we talked about SB 684, 1123. We even talked about SB 9, right? And SB 9 just seemed like that's the one I heard of the most, right? Before SB 1123 this year, where they're like, oh, SB 9, lot split, get 4 units. Do you typically recommend people kind of using SB 9 as like the fallback plan then? Because SB 9 seems like the most straightforward way to get 4 units on a single family lot, if you will.
yeah, the problem with SB 9 is that there's an ownership requirement. So
Ah,
3-year ownership requirement, which might be going away or gone. I don't know if the law has been amended yet, but I'd heard something about that. I don't know. It's like, the other thing I'll say here is that you really best off having a land use attorney involved. And I
got
have
it.
a few both experienced and inexperienced developers that are doing that. I have some that are not, and those are mostly experienced developers. And maybe their project is a little more straightforward than some of these. This complexity of remainder lots and other elements like R1 zoning, the more complexity you have, the more you need a land use attorney to make sure that the that you're interpreting the law right. Because I mean, I have this information, and again, each place is different, and going in with a letter from a land use attorney that says I can do this and here's how the law is being interpreted is going to carry a lot more weight than my drawings say on the front of just making sure you can get this done. You can actually do it in any given city.
Ah, so it's almost like a balance of like, hey, I did some research. I have this letter from this land use attorney, but city or Miss City Planner, what are your thoughts, right? You're still trying to take that balanced approach of not trying to just force a project down someone's throat, but you are demonstrating that you have done some research. Would you say that's probably the right approach to approaching a city whenever you're looking at being creative like this?
Yeah, I mean, because you never know. You just never
Yeah.
know what you get. So, here, these are some of the results in this particular project. This again it's an R1 lot. It is 8 units, and this is the current kind of set. You can see the subdivision here from the civil engineer. You can see our site layouts and our floor plans, which we've talked about. And elevations is something we've been working on. Again, this is kind of like curb appeal, and this kind of
Yeah.
thing
This looks
will
nice.
help those units sell we hope. But these are the renderings here. We're just kind of exploring different color palettes. Oops,
Wow, that's nice.
well, that's a different project. That's actually that's another 6-unit project.
But you got a roof deck patio. I love that.
Yeah. So in that case, this lot, this is an AI rendering, so it's a little weird. But in this case, the lot is being maxed out. So there's no place for open space to get these 6 units on there. Whereas in the other case, we had yards, we had enough space, again, because we reduced the density and had this advantage of getting these small yards for each unit. So no roof decks are needed. Roof decks are expensive, they're a liability, they leak. So these
I'm
are,
so glad we're on the same page there.
Southern California, there's much, a little less chance that they're going to leak. So,
all right. Well, Matt, it seems like we've gone through a big project. Like, let's just say for someone with $500,000 or $1 million, right? Is this a type of project that's good for them? Like taking a single family lot and sort of subdividing into 8 units plus another unit in the front. Is that the type of project that if $500,000 or $1 million in terms of liquidity is suited for them?
I guess it depends, right? If you want to buy a property all cash, you could burn through your million or half
Oh
a
yeah.
million, right? And depending on the arrangement and everything else, getting the land is part of it. But if you leverage the land, you put a certain amount of money down, and then you take out the rest in construction loans and development money loans, then yeah, I mean, I think $500,000 will get you enough to get money down on the lot, and maybe even a private money lender. If you don't have a track record, that's how we did our first deal. Went to private money. It wasn't that much different interest wise. And because it was only interest on the drawdowns, it actually made sense. I think I was going to tell you this earlier. When I did our first deal, I mean, this is a little bit crazy, but we bought the land for $50K and we did pay all cash for it. So
Wow.
now we just owned the land. And then the rest of it was really sweat equity. But for me, and a lot of people struggle with this, I was pulling down money from my practice in architecture to fund all the profits were being funneled into the project. So you kind of need some source, either the money set aside or, a day job, depending on where you're from. And if you're independently wealthy or whatever. But that money was being paid into the project as we went. So it was paying for the engineering, and then it was paying for the city fees, and then it was paying for, so we just kind of paid as we went for the rest of it. And then we leveraged up for the construction loan. So, I mean, we did it technically with maybe $50,000. This is a 3-unit deal, by the way, but with $50,000 plus a kind of influx of cash. But I would say in the end, the total capital we put into it was probably around 100, maybe 200K for those 3
Wow.
units.
Including
Yeah.
soft costs and the equity required for the construction
Well,
loan.
yeah, I mean, by the time we did the deal, the value of the property had kind of shot up. So that was a bit of equity that we were able to count. Some lenders will count it, some won't. But we were lucky in that respect. So the property was worth several $100,000 by the time we pulled together the loan for construction, and we paid for all the upfront costs. The more you have done, the more likely it is you're going to get the loan. I think that we had an entitlement already. But again, that's a pretty low-hanging fruit. I mean, now you can't find a property really anywhere, an urban area in California for $40K. But even some I've seen like at 100 or 200K. So, let's say you go in and pay that 200K for the property. Soft costs are going to be, you can calculate, depending on where you are, between $200,000 and $500,000 a foot for hard costs. And soft costs are generally going to be 20 on this size project, 20 to 30% of the hard cost. So you can kind of work backwards. And I think we have a cost calculator on the website people can download. But if you go in talk to a GC or 3 GCs and they say, oh, it's around this much, you plug in that hard cost, multiply it times the area, times it by a percentage, get your soft costs, and you'll have a good idea of what it will take to get you RTI, so ready to issue the permit. And you might end up needing to invest all that money up front. The property, the land value, land price, and whatever that carry is going to be if you're going to leverage it, and then your soft costs. And you can borrow against the soft costs too, but a little harder to get that loan. Maybe after
Yes.
entitlements, you just invest the money into the entitlement and then you borrow the rest of the soft costs and then you borrow for the construction loan. So your equity, your cash piece is basically allowing you to leverage each of those components, right?
Yeah, and I love like, when I think about it, it's almost as if, hey, maybe I'm buying a single family lot, and if I'm able to maybe rent out the property and create some sort of cash flow while I'm going through the entitlement process, that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable that I'm not getting a big drain on my monthly cash. But to your point, as you get your project entitled, you're forcing the amount of equity into the deal that allows you to generate enough equity for that construction loan down the line, because a bank doesn't want to give you all the property, all
Yeah,
the capital up front.
you're gaining equity as you develop it, right?
Mhm.
And that in many cases, I know, especially with private money, because I enjoyed doing it with private money because they'd just come out and they'd say, okay, it looks like you're that far along. Here's the check, as opposed to having a third party verification and all that kind of thing. But I think that, they know that their money they're loaning you is going into the value of the property. And if they need,
Yes.
if you screw it up, they can then go and take it and they have that value. People get really slippery with it, but that's the fundamental premise.
Man, this has been such a great conversation, Matt. We covered so much tactical items here. I mean, if there was like one thing that you want people to really make sure they took away from today's conversation, what do you think that might be?
I don't know. Hire a Baron Studio to do your project.
Yes. Yes.
It's complicated. Call it.
See,
You know,
and
I
that's why I want to bring you on, because I think sometimes people have this thought in their head, like, oh, I can just go get this, I can go shove this project down the city's throat, and boom, I will get my project. But it's just there's so many levels to this thing that
yeah.
honestly,
If you're
hey, go
new,
ahead.
maybe if I was being more less self promoting, hire someone, get good people around you. If you haven't done it before, because there's so many landmines, and if you close and you're sitting on something that's not what you thought it was, again, that those bankruptcy stories are real. Like things like this can take you out. And sometimes I wonder why anybody does it, because there is money in it, to be sure. I don't know if there's enough money to justify how much stress and risk and everything. You have to have a certain personality type, to be able to kind of stomach it. Either that or be on some kind of mind altering substance or Prozac or something like that.
Because seriously, I mean, dude, you might get a little nauseous going through this project for the first
Yeah.
time, especially if you don't have the right team, or even if you have the
When
right team.
when we were doing our deal and it came down to the end where we had drawn down the entire $1.5 million loan, and there was like $12,000 coming due every month, and we had to get it leased up. There were several times where I thought I was going to throw up for sure. Like, cause you're like, okay, it's done. We got to get it. We got to get somebody in here and start paying because they wanted it leased up before they would refinance it into
Oh
a
yeah.
permanent loan. And they wanted to see those leases. And it was like, but we're not quite done. We've got these couple of last permits, and it was hectic. It was hard.
Yeah, it's almost like you gotta be on top of every single point. It's like, can you pre-lease it? Can you not pre-lease it? Can you pre-show it? And
Yeah.
now it's not just the building part. It's like, hey, this is the execution. This is the part where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And
But
it's a
fortunately,
whole process.
It's stabilized
Yeah.
now, and it's cash flowing. So
Let's go. That's so
yeah,
exciting, man.
let's
All
go.
right. Well, hey, for people that are listening to today's conversation, at the minimum, I'm not just promoting Matt, but I challenge you, if you're listening to this conversation and you're trying to do a similar project, listen to this entire conversation we did with Matt and think about, well, now that I have some semblance of what the sequencing might look like and the things that I need to look at, well, I can challenge somebody, right? At the worst case, you have one person that you can call right now today, Matt, and figure out whether or not this is a project you want to take on. But
Yeah,
if
we'll
you want to
look at
hire
it.
somebody else, Like,
You
go
do that
ask
too.
the questions, challenge it,
Yeah.
challenge them.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
this is the best way to figure out whether or not the person you're working with actually knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, but somebody can call and I'll give thoughts for any project, just talk through it, see what your goals are and, where you want to go with it and see if it makes sense.
Dude, this has been so fun. Matt, hey, for people that want to reach out to you, where can they contact you and where can they find more about your company?
So baranstudio.com, and pretty much everything you need to find me is there's a email contact, phone number, and there's also a bunch of stuff you can download if you're interested in that. That's useful tools. There's a resources page. So check
All
that
right.
out.
And we'll make sure you follow Matt on X, on LinkedIn, because this guy posts information every single day, valuable information. And man, we couldn't even cover the latest SB bill with you about all the transit bonuses, but maybe I can get you back on in a couple months from now and kind of talk about how
Yeah.
you're interpreting the law and how to apply it and what developments
Yeah,
you
I
learn
still
from
need
you.
to I still need to dig into that one and see where we're going to go with it. And then a month we'll have absorbed it, have info kind of parsed out where the reality of the law actually hits the road, as we said. Yeah.
Got it. All right, Matt. Hey, thank you so much for
Yes.
today, man. I can't wait to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. And we are out.